Hi everybody. Today it feels a bit like Mardi Gras to me. We're all coming out. I started this with an autumn gathering, it then went to a winter gathering, and now it's a spring gathering. So today what we're going to do is around the theme of making meaning out of grief, and you might think, what the hell does that mean? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this came about. So you may have heard of a guy called David Kessler, who was the co-author of the famous book by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, The 5 Stages of Grief. And you might remember those 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then final acceptance. Well, some years after this book was written, David's 21-year-old son died from an accidental overdose. He said at the time that despite having a head full of knowledge about grief, he didn't appreciate just how difficult the grief journey was. A couple of years ago, he wrote a new best-selling book, Making Meaning Out of Grief, The 6th Stage. He said whilst he did get to the point of acceptance of his son's death, he still had this really deep need to do something meaningful. So he has dedicated his life to helping people suffering from loss, and probably would be the foremost speaker in the world today on this topic. He believes loss is what happens to you in life, but making meaning is what you make happen after the loss. So this afternoon, Cherie Savage will be introducing 3 of our members, Mark Waugh, Jeff Farland and Dave Vidal, who have all made meaning of their grief by taking up various projects as a legacy to their children. But making meaning does not have to mean undertaking large projects. It can be as simple as nurturing others as we do at Compassionate Friends. It could be grant writing or fundraising, writing on the Facebook page, helping out with the Focus magazine. It could also mean calling someone who is struggling, making cups of tea, listening patiently to someone who is grieving. In doing this, you are making the world a better place. Talking about sharing our grief today, I would like to welcome Kathy Kelly, who with her husband Ralph has had to endure the worst of suffering, losing not 1 son, but 2. Their eldest son Thomas was punched in an unprovoked attack in King's Cross, and their youngest son Stuart took his own life 4 years later. Both boys were just 18 years old. In the aftermath of their son's death, Kathy and Ralph made meaning of their grief by becoming the public face of a campaign to end the violence at Sydney's major night spots. They were instrumental in getting the laws changed and also worked hard to provide safe places for young people out at night. They too have made the world a better place through their efforts. I would like to thank Kathy for speaking today. Her and I have had some long conversations, and I know it's not the easiest thing for her to do. We all know the toll grief takes. I know I reflect the thoughts of many of you when you consider just how damned hard it is to live with the death of 1 child, let alone 2, let alone losing them in such a tragic manner. Please welcome Kathy Kelly.
Thank you all for coming out today. I'm not sure why I'm getting a bit teary, but anyway, I'm honoured and humbled to share my story with you. Writing down what I've been through these past years does help. It's cathartic in some ways. I hope that my words will touch you today and perhaps support you and your own feelings of your great loss and your deep sadness. My promise to you is to be open and honest as I can so that you may feel a sense of community, understanding, and so that you might go home today with even a little bit of hope. We're all here because we have suffered the greatest of losses. that of a child, whether it's your own, a sibling, a grandchild, or someone who means everything to you. From the onset, may I say, no one understands your grief, your loss, your trauma, and you will never stop grieving the loss of your child. If you're like me, the idea of hearing what tragedies others have been through sometimes feels impossible to endure. However, sometimes listening to these stories brings a feeling of compassion, kindness, and understanding to our hearts. I hope you might feel this today. First and foremost, I'm a mum to Thomas, Madeline, and Stuart. Being their mother has been my life for the last 27 years. Something extraordinary happens when you become a parent. I think we discover a different love to the ones we have for our partners. It's unconditional. There's nothing we wouldn't do for them. As parents, we all have hopes and dreams for our children, and who would have ever thought that our worst fears would become a reality? Our eldest child, Thomas, was 18 years old. He headed out for his first night out in Sydney to celebrate a friend and a colleague's 18th birthday party in July 2012. That Saturday afternoon, I called Tom and asked him to have fun, but I asked him to take care. I told him that I loved him. He said, "I love you too, Mum." Those were his last words to me. Later that night, Thomas stepped out of a taxi at 10:05 p.m. Without any confrontation, another man walked up to Thomas and punched him in the face. At 10:07, Thomas was dead. Thomas was rushed to hospital for emergency surgery to relieve the pressure on his brain. He was on life support for the next 2 days. However, he was brain dead the moment the paramedics arrived at the scene. We held him tightly as the life support was removed, but before we could catch our breath, he was whisked away to surgery to retrieve his organs. The next day, we were asked by the New South Wales Police to do a live interview at their headquarters to appeal to the public to try to find the person that did this to our son. Later that day, we returned home to the country with one less child. Our two remaining children were just 17 and 14 years of age. We were in despair and disbelief, and life was like living in a fog, meeting and greeting the many people who stopped by to do what they could help. The first few weeks felt like they would never end. So many people coming and going. And the very beginning, we all felt so very different and so lost. But not long after, the calls and the visitors stopped altogether, and people we knew would cross the road to get away from us. So months later, Ralph answered a call from a close friend who had been calling him every day. Together they decided that it was time to reach out to people to understand how this could happen. He met with the New South Wales Police Commissioner at the time, the head of homicide, politicians, doctors, and many others. Andrew Scipione, who was the commissioner, said, "We can't arrest our way out of this. We need the community to step up to create change." And from this point, our grief became anger, which in turn became determination. Ralph became consumed with his passion to make a difference, and it seemed to devour his every waking moment. Together we began to advocate for change and to introduce preventative programs. We had to fight for justice for Thomas. We've been told by the DPP that we'd be lucky to see the perpetrator get any time in prison, let alone any length of time beyond a couple of years. 13 months after we lost Thomas, we launched a foundation in his name. Ralph is still very much living his life around the foundation, and it's been a subject of many arguments between us over the years. I'm proud of what he's achieved, incredibly proud, but I often wonder, when will it be enough? I'm still on the board, but I have decided if I'm going to continue to speak in public or to anybody, my focus will be around my life, my journey, that life without our boys, and about getting up each day and doing the best that I can. Through all of what we've endured, Ralph has been our primary source of income. I was a stay-at-home mum with our children, and now that we're empty nesters and I've just hit the big 6-0, I'm finding it a struggle to reinvent who I am. Ralph has had his own business for several years, and for many months after losing Thomas, he found that he simply couldn't work. He couldn't concentrate in meetings, and every detail seemed insignificant. His business was being greatly affected, losing client after client, and we found ourselves financially stretched as the bills kept coming in. When we couldn't find the money to pay for simple things like council rates, he'd asked me to call and see if we could get some relief and extension. Every time I had to do that, I was so embarrassed, and often there was little or no empathy on the other end of the line. Whilst learning to live with our grief, start a foundation and care for our 2 remaining children, we also had a long and painful experience going through the New South Wales courts. It took 3 years through the local, the district, the Supreme Court, the Court of Criminal Appeal, and finally the High Court of Australia before our deal was finally over. That made it very difficult to grieve the loss of our son, and by the end of it, we were almost bankrupt. We had a lovely home and a couple of nice cars, but trying to sell them and free ourselves of our debt was another mountain to climb. The interest on the debts was more than what the cars were worth. Property market was down, and it took us 4 years to sell our home, but we had to try and hang on. We met several other families in those early years and subconsciously realised that every one of them were in similar positions at some point. A loss so great affects you not only emotionally, physically and mentally, but it ruins you financially. We knew that something more could be done to support victims who were going through these dreadful situations. So we met with the New South Wales Attorney General, Brad Hazzard, who was in that position at the time, to put forward our suggestions on how to help victims financially. Victim Services New South Wales now offers assistance. It's not well known, you just have to contact them and see if you're eligible. They provide assistance to support wherever there is a debt, and there may be something there that can help you, which might minimise financial stress. When our ordeal was over with the courts, almost over, Stuart called me from school. He was a boarder out at Parramatta, and after the Crown Appeal was heard in the Supreme Court, he asked if he could address the press following the court's judgment delivery. Stuart was 14 when Thomas was killed, so he was just a little boy who wanted to hide from his pain and get on with his life. He was now almost 17 and about to commence his final year at school. He bravely spoke to the media when he emerged in the Supreme Court building in Sydney. He innocently took a stance against violence now that he was old enough to make that choice. He wanted to speak up for his brother, whom he loved and he missed. He wanted kids his age to know that things weren't okay and that they needed to come together to bring about change. The following year, in September 2015, we held our second fundraising dinner. Most people who attended that night were family and friends. However, there were many others whom we didn't know that gathered to support our work. There were also several politicians and important policymakers in the room, and Ralph had asked Stuart if he would get up and address them. Stuart has since been called a political puppet by nasty bloggers and other people who had no clue who he was or what our family had endured. I will say this, our son could and would not ever be coerced to do something he didn't want to do. I hadn't heard his speech until he delivered it that night. Ralph and he had devised its contents together. It was a speech that made its way into the media nationwide, and it was a powerful message to communities and our governments. If you're interested in hearing it, it is available online through YouTube. The following year, he was starting his adult life after having graduated Year 12. In February 2016, the New South Wales Government began the process of reviewing the results of the lockout laws in Sydney. As a result, our family came under intense scrutiny by many who did not support them. After all, we didn't bring in the lockout laws, the government did. Some people were even sending us death threats. People soon forgot what we had been through. We had lost a son. Stuart commenced at St Paul's Residential College at the University of Sydney, which coincided with the backlash about the lockout laws. Fairfax media investigated the false allegations that were circulating in the press, and they put Stuart's speech online to support our family. Unfortunately, this coincided with the beginning of Orientation Week. Our darling boy was under fire from his peers the moment he stepped onto the grounds of the college. His peers were angry, feeling their right to drink whenever they wanted had been selfishly taken from them. The very laws designed to protect them would eventuate in him taking his own life. Something happened to Stuart in the 12 hours he was at that college. We know he didn't sleep in his room that night, and this was all totally out of character. We picked up a different boy that afternoon. We arrived to find Stuart sitting in the gutter with his head in his hands outside RPA Hospital. He got in the car and sobbed uncontrollably, and we took him home. We tried over the next few weeks to ask him what had happened. However, this day, we still don't know. Stuart went to St Paul's College a happy, funny young man and left the next day changed forever. After 3 months of being at home, Stuart began to talk about wanting to go overseas to study and restart his life. He felt he would never be accepted here. He applied for several places and was offered a position at a university not far from London. One afternoon, Ralph and Stuart took our dog for a walk. Stuart brought up going overseas again, and Ralph said if we could manage it, we would want him to have counselling, as we would be so worried about him living on the other side of the world. Stuart said, "Look at me, Dad. I go to work without complaining, love training my rugby boys at school, and I'm fit and I'm strong. Do I look like I need help?" And Ralph's reply was, "No, I guess not." We told Stuart we would consider him going overseas the following year, as financially it was just beyond us at that time. On July 25th, 2016, 2 weeks later, Stuart left our home in the middle of the night, drove to the beach in my car, made a little bed in the back, took an overdose and went to sleep. He had given up on life. Stuart was unable to share his pain. Instead, he hid what he was going through from all of us who loved him. Losing both our beautiful boys at just 18 is still very difficult to accept. Whilst my days no longer find me in a heap, it's still very sad and sometimes so terribly exhausting. There have been days, and I'm sure there'll be others, where I simply don't want to be here, living this life without my sons. When Thomas was murdered, I often thought, why him? I was 51 years old at the time, and I thought, I've had a fortunate life. I've been in love, married, had 3 beautiful children, and surely it should have been me rather than him. Now when I'm having one of those days, I try to remember the importance for me to carry on for those who love and need me. I think about the responsibility I have to my family, our daughter. Simply put, I've had the experience of 60 years. I have a choice. I need to carry on to live my life. For if I falter, as Stuart did, there will be so much more agony for people left behind. I think that's what's so heartbreaking about our young people. They just can't see that tomorrow might be different. The ripple effect of losing Thomas resulted in Stuart's death. If Thomas was still here today, I'm certain Stuart would be too. As a result of losing 2 boys, one to violence and one to bullying, which resulted in him taking his life, we have since rebranded the foundation to Stay Kind. If we lived in a world with kindness, both our boys would still be here. There are 3,500 suicides every single year in Australia alone. 9 suicides a day, with 280 lives affected by each of these deaths. Many who take their lives do not seek medical intervention or speak out about their feelings. They may have even just experienced something in their life that changed them and resulted in them in feeling that there was no way out. Suicide is still the unspoken. There's a stigma attached to the death and to those of us that are left behind. It's a very lonely place to find yourself. You may not agree, but I still believe that it's now time to listen, to talk, to share, not just about suicide, but all those things we've always had ingrained to us as forbidden subjects. We should talk about death, grief, feelings. On average, about 1 in 6 women and 1 in 8 men will experience some level of depression in their life. If we start to speak about these things as a norm, those suffering around us won't feel that they're different, ostracised, or feel that they have something wrong with them. I personally hate the term mental health. How about emotional well-being? After all, our minds are part of our bodies and sometimes they get sick too. Having the opportunity to talk about our boys by sharing our story gives me purpose. Without it, I'm not sure where I would be today. Ralph's had the foundation to keep him going, and it's taken me close to 9 years to understand that's what he needs in his life to work through his grief. For me, it's about being able to talk about our boys openly. This is not often with him. Oh my goodness, how differently we both process it. Stuart wouldn't talk to us about how he was feeling, and it's because of this and what he chose to do that I now know how important it is to have support. We all need that someone who we can talk to, who will listen. That person to show us we are needed and loved. A long-lasting hug can be the difference for some. If you can't let people in to share in your pain, that's okay, but it's worth trying. It might just give you that little connection. It might help you find a little bit of strength. It's been a while since I've spoken publicly, and coming to a group of people today who are broken, lost, and in enormous pain has been a little bit terrifying for me. I was telling Linda earlier, I've had a couple of really weird dreams the last few nights. One of them was actually that I was catering the event, and I hate cooking and everything went wrong. So that's kind of how I've been feeling. But, and I really wondered if there was anything I could say today that will give you hope. And I certainly don't have the answers about, making meaning out of grief. But what I'm trying to share, I hope will make you feel a sense of normality. Whilst many days some are better than others, it continues to be a strain. I get up and I try to keep moving forward. I sometimes wonder if I didn't have 2 very needy dogs, if I would even bother getting up at all. But I do have them, and even if I'm feeling low, they make me. They make me get up, and I put that one foot in front of the other. If that's all you can do for the moment, that's okay. It's enough. Aim to do 1 or 2 little things each day. Build on it. I found that for each few things I managed to achieve, there would often be some little thing that upset me, and I'd find myself right back where I started. I'm sure you've been through that. They will continue to happen, but you just keep going on and trying. Michael Crossland, a speaker I greatly admire, said, "We are blessed with the air that we breathe and the opportunities that we have. We need to get out of bed and do something that your future self would be proud of. It doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down, but how many times you get up is what determines the quality of your life." I'm going into my 10th year of loss, and I falter at times, sometimes often. My biggest struggle at the moment is the relationship I have with my husband. Some of you here might be able to relate. I get so upset when I see the love our couple friends have for each other, little signs of affection or intimacy that seem lost to us. Since losing Stuart, our second loss, Ralph says he has no connection with me. He's said this many times, and each time he does, it cuts a little bit more into my heart. He tries to justify it by saying he doesn't feel he has a connection with anyone. But I find this impossible to understand, and I can't comprehend why he doesn't want to move forward together to find some joy. He says he does, but nothing seems to change. Don't get me wrong, we get on. We share walks together with our dogs, do things around the house together, watch a series on TV, but it's all becoming a little bit more like a friendship than a marriage, and it frustrates the hell out of me. It's not like I'm asking for passionate sex on the kitchen table, but what I want more than, I do want more than just being a companion or someone to keep everything in order at home. That's not a marriage, not to me anyway. It's taken a long time to find help. In fact, we're still looking. We've even had conversations about separating at times. I know that's not what I want, and I feel deep in my heart it's not what he wants either. After all, he's still at home with me. Sometimes it seems that everything is such an effort. Disagreements, whether small or a huge fight, compounds my grief. Every time I feel overwhelmed, my boys and what we've lost comes flooding back to me. That probably doesn't help you, but that's how it is for me. And if it happens to you, you're not crazy. When someone you love more than life itself is taken from you, our thoughts are clouded, and even little things don't make sense. We've been offered counselling over the years. Some just don't fit, or possibly even understand. We give up and then we try again. We're soon to start something new together, but in between, it can be a long and lonely journey. I did want to share with you today how we stumbled across this last little ray of hope. In September this year, Ralph and I had been married for 30 years. We had hoped to celebrate with a trip away, which I booked back in February. COVID was creeping back into our lives with borders shut from time to time, so I thought I'd play it safe and book something in New South Wales. We had both always wanted to visit Lord Howe Island, so I booked 2 different venues, a lovely little beach cottage for 6 nights, and the final 2 nights at a luxury retreat where the first night happened to be on our wedding anniversary. Well, September came and went, and New South Wales was still in lockdown, but fortunately we came across a cancellation and managed to get away at the end of October because we were going from a regional area where we are to another regional area. One day, whilst we were away, we had walked into the tiny village for a coffee and were wandering back along the roadside to our beach house. We were chatting about all the amazing bird life on the island and were looking ahead at this tree we had passed many times with these little white birds in the branches. They were always in pairs, and one of the locals told us that they strangely laid their eggs on the branches, not in a nest, just in the crook of a branch, which I thought was quite strange. We noticed a couple who we'd been seen several times before but not yet spoken to, and they had stopped and were taking photos of the birds. I can't remember how we approached them, probably just a hello as they walked towards us. I think it was Ralph who said something first. We chatted for a while. I was talking to the man called Tom and Ralph with the other guy called Tim. Occasionally my ears pricked up and we all joined in conversation together. Tom mentioned that he'd been in finance and worked in film. He was from Indiana in the USA. Tim was a psychiatrist and told us he had lectured in Wuhan, China of all places, and had been to many other places lecturing around the world. They were both very interesting, and we must have been talking for quite a while as a car that passed us stopped on its way back from the village and asked if he could join in because it looked like we were having a great old conversation. We spoke about where they lived, and I'm not sure how it came up, but they told us about a foundation that they had created to help couples living with grief after the loss of a child. They mentioned they had followed the Kellys story after Thomas was killed, and it motivated to get the foundation up and running. Well, of course, this led us to say, we're the Kellys. And they said how sorry they were for what we'd been through and that they were devastated when they had later heard about Stuart's death. Before we knew it, there were many tears by the side of the road. Tom fished around in his wallet and found a couple of business cards for their charity and asked us to reach out if we felt that they might be able to help us in some way. Whilst we were away, we mostly had a lovely time, but one night my feelings of not feeling love reared their ugly head again and we ended up in a row. The following day I told Ralph I wanted to spend the day alone. I think it was the next day that we ran into Tom and Tim. And maybe it's all in my head, hoping for the best, but I can't help but feel that our Thomas and Stuart may have played a part in our meeting. Ralph has had a number of signs from Stuart over the last few years, strange things that wouldn't have normally happened or we would have even noticed. I don't feel I've been so lucky with the signs. However, I think when I really do think about it, maybe I have. The year after Thomas died, we took the children to London. The first day we walked around Kensington where Ralph was born. He took us to a little preparatory school that he went to with his sisters. It was called Lady Eden's School. When we walked around the corner, we noticed the sign. It was now called Thomas's Kensington. Was that a coincidence? A little bit later that day, we looked up and saw this huge sign, St Thomas's Hospital. Maybe we're just more aware of the names, or maybe they are reaching out to us. I'm not really sure. I do feel, however, that our chance meeting with Tim and Tom was quite remarkable in its timing. We've since reached out and are in the planning process of meeting one of their therapists. With regard to therapy, you might find the right person, or you might have several failed attempts along the way. I've tried a couple of different people, and whilst I don't look forward to it each week, I usually feel a weight lifted off my shoulders by the end of each session. It's good to have someone impartial to listen to and chat with. It can be a confusing time finding the right person, and we've recently been told that psychotherapists are often helpful for those suffering loss. I guess watch this space and I'll let you know whether they make a difference to us. I certainly don't have all the answers, but I'm trying to live the best life that I can, sharing who I am, who my boys were, how I've changed, and who I've become helps me through my loss. I'm still searching for answers, but hope one day to feel content and peace. If I'm lucky, I might truly feel happiness again one day. I always knew that if and when our daughter has children, we would find joy through grandchildren. Madeline is 26 at the moment, and she assures me that children are not coming anytime soon. Anyway, we can't place all that pressure on her. I think it's really up to us to find our own joy. It's been a while since I've spoken publicly, actually since pre-COVID. You can probably tell from all the jittering and the nerves today. I haven't actually spoken about grief as such in any detail. I've tried over the years and still today to talk about my feelings with my family, but most of the time it falls on deaf ears. Not because they don't care, but because they have their own pain to deal with. And I think that both Ralph and Madeline keep their grief so very close and personal. I often found myself in the past thinking they didn't care, had forgotten about the boys, or that they're just getting on with it. But that couldn't be further from the truth. When preparing for today, I thought it'd be great to do a little bit of research about what others had to say about grief. There's nothing quite like the sharing of and hearing about other people's personal stories. They may be hard to listen to and sometimes provide you with very little comfort, but you may feel a sense of normality through them. We're all different, we all grieve in our own way, and those who are close to us or come into our lives may leave us feeling positive and loved, or they may even create more pain for us to bear. What we all have in common in life, though, is that there are no guarantees, but with hope and love, life may eventually be okay. You might find a new purpose, you might find that peace, hopefully some joy and a way forward. Rachel Stevenson is a speaker I came across who is against grieving in silence, as it is often stated in grief literature. The published literature talks about telling the truth about death, especially with regards to children. Rachel lost her mother at the age of 5. The following day, her grandmother told her to call her mummy. Even at 5, Rachel said no. The thought of replacing her was as though her mother had never existed. She couldn't just vanish one night and be replaced the next morning. She learned at a very early age that she needed to acknowledge her loss. Her father, however, never spoke about her mother and how she had died. He ultimately became a heavy drinker whose addiction resulted in his early death. He repressed his grief, for he felt he deserved to be blamed for not being able to save her as he was with his wife in the car when she died. Rachel made a choice to share her grief with those around her who would listen. She said she always told the truth, even as a little girl. When her father died, she shared with her children that her grandfather's body got sick because he kept his feelings to himself and made choices that weren't good for him. She said, had he shared his grief with her and had he been honest from the very beginning, he may have lived a happier, healthier and longer life. Nora McKinney lost her baby, father and husband all within 2 months of each other. She said she hates that gasp that you get from people when they hear what she's endured. People say they can't imagine how they could survive if it happened to them. I hate that too. You can survive. As what other choice do we have? Nora went on to say, you can imagine what this is like, and you should imagine, because it could happen to you. We all have a 100% chance of dying. And it's common to hear people say things like, you need to move on. We don't move on, we move forward. The pain gets easier. That might be true for some, but grief is a different ride for everyone. Stay strong, they wouldn't want you to be that way, but they died and it hurts. So how can I be strong? She must be over it by now. We'll never be over it. We just learn to live with it. Our losses will be always present. Our loved ones are indelible, and they will always be a part of our lives. As time passes, even the little things that annoyed you at the time may become happy memories. I wanted to share an example or two. One year we took our 3 kids to New York. They spent the first few nights fighting over who had the best bed. Why does Madeline always get her own bed? Just because she's a girl, the boys would always say. Thomas and Stuart spent the first half of the night, every single night, making the Great Wall of China down the middle of the bed with their pillows, just so they didn't have to touch skin. When they were little, we had a swimming pool built. I'd arrive home from school with them all in the car. And Thomas, being the eldest, would always say, last one in is a rotten egg. Several times Stuart ran from the car and jumped in with his school uniform still on. Oh, how lovely it would be to have those times back again. Nora, whom I spoke of earlier, went on to marry again, and she eventually understood that it was a new chapter in her life. She was so grateful for the new love that she had found, but it made her realise the enormity of what she had lost. I had the pleasure of meeting Rosie Batty a couple of years ago, and she said that she was so thankful for the nation's response and the opportunities that have come to her in her life, but it was all very bittersweet. She felt conflicted about the awards she received, but now understands that they were not because her son Luke had died, but because of her reaction to his death. Like me, she didn't want her son to die in vain. Challenging domestic violence in this country gave her purpose and a new meaning to her life. I too have, like Rosie, struggled with anxiety, PTSD and trauma. When we met, we shared how we both had meltdowns with family and friends and how the anger sometimes just takes over because they don't get it. I've driven quite a few family members away, and as sad as that makes me feel at times, I know that I need to look out for who I am myself, so that I'm in a place that I need to be and look after myself and be a strong and loving example for my daughter. Because of the trauma and grief you're feeling, you hope that people will treat you with tenderness, kindness, empathy and compassion. Often it is not the case, sometimes the complete opposite. And I really have felt often that maybe it's just me, maybe I'm this crazy person that people can't get along with anymore. You may find, as I have, that your immediate family and some of your friends may not treat you with compassion because they just don't understand what you're going through. One Boxing Day, when we usually get together with Ralph's extended family, Ralph, Madeline and I found ourselves just talking to each other for the entire day. Our own family basically ignored us. All they needed to do was put their arms around us and say, we know today is always difficult, but we love you and we want to spend the day with you. I met Daniel Christie's mother. He was the young 18-year-old boy who was killed in almost the same place as Thomas 12 months later. She told me that her employer told her she had to come back to work within 7 days following her son's death or lose her job. And I just find that impossible to understand. It's a huge thing to get through this, and it's hard to find people who care. Sometimes it's comforting to know that there are others like yourselves, like all of us in the room today, because they do get it. Rosie spoke to me about suppressing her grief and how she tried to be brave. People around her said how worried they were about her and that she needed to make time to grieve. She said she'd cry herself to sleep every night in those early years, as I'm sure we all have. We quickly learn to face the world with a smile and an "I'm okay." But that raw emotion sits just below the surface of your skin. It's always there. And we shed our tears when we're alone, and we can let ourselves truly feel our pain. But you need to find a certain courage when facing others. We dig deep to keep control. I used to judge people in the media when they're asking for public assistance to solve a crime and they didn't cry. I couldn't understand how they were so composed. But I soon found out that there's no point in sobbing and not making any sense when you're speaking out and trying to get a point across. We never feel the pain will stop, but it does ease. Just before we lost Stuart, things were starting to turn a corner. It had been 4 years since Thomas was killed. Then we were thrown right back into the life of despair, a hole we'd strive so desperately to get out of, to find ourselves right back where we'd started. But there does come a time when you feel you must not try to react to the pain and the past and look forward to your future. I still feel sadness often, as I've said, but I can't let it define me. I have moments in my life of joy, moments when things feel meaningful, and moments when I feel I might be making a difference. We all have challenges in our lives, and life often doesn't seem fair, but it is what it is, and we really must draw on the strength that is within each and every one of us to keep going. Michael Tessalona said that our tragedy makes us more compassionate. A long time ago, people used to wear black or wear a black armband, and that was their way of telling us that they had been through a personal loss. It was a visual representation, telling the world that they were broken. But now these traditions have all disappeared, and there's no preparation for people that we come across. Of course there are no words, but there are some actions. And I mentioned earlier that a hug can be perfect. It's simple, compassionate, and the great thing about a hug is that there's no response needed. Anticipation is also very important. Even today, after so many years, I'm not the person who makes the call to keep in touch. I feel blessed that I have a few people in my life who continue to make that effort to call me and contact me from time to time. They anticipate that I might need to see someone, but understand my sadness often keeps me to myself. When we do catch up, I find myself saying beforehand, I'm not going to talk about the boys today, I'm not going to talk about me, it's not going to be about me. I'm going to make sure that everything we talk about is about what they've been up to, rather than focusing on myself. But my very clever, compassionate friends who really know me understand when I need to talk, and they listen with kindness in their hearts. Sometimes we just need to be heard, to be acknowledged in our pain. What can also be anticipated is your family's needs. If it's really early days for some of you here today since your loss, and people want to help you, let them. Ask someone to organise a roster to do the very basic things that you simply can't find the strength to do. Meals are a great start. Ask them to mow your lawns. Help with your other children if that's something to give you some time to yourself. Visit you so you don't have to be alone in your grief if that's what you want. Grief is one of those things you just don't get until you go through it. We may smile and move forward, but that doesn't mean we've moved on. Someone once told me that the most valuable thing that they heard when their sister died was that she shouldn't wait to feel better, but instead to make space in her heart for where that pain sits. Her life was being lived through a shattered lens, but she was going to give it a red-hot go. She wanted to enjoy life because she knew how blessed she was to have it and to celebrate getting older, as it's a privilege not afforded to everyone. I think when I heard her sentiments, I thought I had to stop feeling my life wasn't worth living, and that although there would always be waves of grief in between the waves, I might choose to smile at the memories instead of living with the sadness that they were gone. I, like all these people that I've spoken about, am not special or extraordinary. I'm just one of many of us here who get up and keep going because we've gone through loss and trauma. Life goes on, the world keeps spinning, and we just need to find a way to keep moving forward. Get up each day, keep placing that foot in front of one another, and hope to stay upright. Find your strength, it's there. You may just surprise yourself one day as you are more capable than you know. Allow others to show you love. Let them hug you if that's okay, and let them sit with you in your pain. It may just keep you going. Earlier this year, two lovely sisters reached out to me from Bendigo in Victoria. One worked as a midwife and the other a photographer. They both found themselves entwined in child loss. Caitlin seeing miscarriages and stillbirth through her work, and Beck with families reaching out to her to capture their child who they were soon to lose through illness. They have since photographed and interviewed many mothers. They wanted to give them a voice. Not everybody has that opportunity to speak out. Their podcast is called The Lost Mothers Project. I think because they've seen so much loss and suffering, and that they were both mothers themselves, the grief these mothers shared resonated so personally with them. You might or may not wish to listen to some of those podcasts, but I heard a few, and I felt again that sense of community, understanding and compassion. Some of the mothers' thoughts on grief were, I don't have anxiety or depression, I have grief, and there's a difference. My grief will be with me forever. It might soften over time, but there is a piece of your heart that is broken and it can't be fixed. Another one said, it definitely taught me that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. It's painful not to be able to talk about my child. There was so much kindness going on, it would have been so easy to see everything so negatively, but the kindness helped us through. One of the loveliest things I did find throughout my search of what to say and share with you today was the sentiments of an older man's approach to life and death. He said, I've survived so far, and a lot of people I've known and loved did not. I've lost friends, acquaintances, colleagues, grandparents, parents, relatives, teachers, mentors, students, neighbours, and a whole range of folks. I have no children, so I can't imagine the depth of pain others feel when they lose a child. You don't get used to dying. I don't want to. I don't want it not to matter. I don't want it to be something that just passes. My scars are a testament to the love and the relationship that I had for that person. If the scar is deep, so was the love. Scar tissue is stronger than the original flesh ever was. Scars are only ugly to people who can't see. As for grief, you will find it comes in waves. When the ship is first wrecked, you're drowning. All you can do is float. You find a piece of wreckage and you hang on for a while. Maybe it's something physical, or a happy memory, or a photograph. In the beginning, the waves are 100 feet tall and crash over you without mercy. They come seconds apart and don't give you time to catch your breath. After a while, maybe weeks, maybe months, you'll find the waves are still 100 feet tall, but they will come further apart. When they come, they still crash over you and wipe you out. But in between, you can breathe and you can function. You never know what's going to trigger the grief. A song, a photo, a smell of something that reminds you of that person. Somewhere down the line, the waves are only 80 or maybe 50 feet tall. They still come, but they're further apart. You might see them coming now, on an anniversary, a birthday, Christmas, or just in a special place. Now you can prepare yourself, and when the waves wash over you, you know that you will come out the other side, soaking wet, spluttering, and still hanging on, but you do come out. The waves will never stop coming, and somehow you don't want them to, but you learn that you will survive them. If you're lucky, you will have lots of scars from lots of loves and lots of shipwrecks. Before I finish, there are a couple of organisations that I've found helpful. Some of you here today are already aware of them. Pentos, which is an ancient Greek word meaning grief, is a not-for-profit organisation which provides free specialist couples therapy after the loss of a child. That's what Ralph and I are just about to go through. Quest for Life is, they run residential programs in the Southern Highlands, and they use strategies to help you with your healing, build resilience and show you how to live in the present. Whilst there is a cost for Quest, they sometimes have grants that are allocated on a case-by-case basis. And one of the things that I did find really helpful when I went there was learning how to respond rather than actually simply react, which I'm very good at doing. It doesn't always go to plan, but I keep trying. We also did daily meditation, and we learnt about healthier nutrition. I more often than not forget about these healthy choices, but I do try to do them every now and then. I just wanted to mention, and it's very short notice, but the next Quest program is scheduled for next Friday, the 26th to the 28th. It's a weekend program, and it currently, up until yesterday, had 6 spaces still available on it. I'm not sort of promoting Quest, but they were extremely a wonderful organisation for both Ralph and I over the time, and they do have some great things if it would help you. This particular weekend that's coming up next Friday is only for people who have lost someone through suicide, and they do have a grief weekend for all types of bereavement running in April next year. But it might be worth giving them a call. The courses are quite expensive, but if you can get funding or partial funding, it might be something that you haven't thought about in the past that might be something you'd like to move with. Last one. I hope by sharing my story with you today that it may be helpful to you in some way. None of us are alone in our journey, and I think that's what we need to remember. I'm staying on through to the end of the next session, where we're going to split into groups. We'll maybe able to have further chats there, some more personal chats, but I believe now we might still have time, if I didn't talk for too long, for some questions. Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. Look, I think with Ralph and myself, I think that's why we're at this stage now where we are really struggling to see whether or not we have a life together. And that's the very first time that I've ever shared that with anybody, because Linda said to me, you know, people want to hear your rawness and whatever you've got that you can share. I think I wanted to share that today because I think people think, oh, you know, we're this amazing couple that have stayed together and we've lost 2 boys and blah, blah, blah. I mean, you all know what it's like. Some of your marriages may not have lasted, some may last, some of you may have been alone when you lost your child. But it's hard, and we deal with it very, very differently. And as I said, you know, through the presentation, there was so much in the early days. I find myself screaming at everybody in the house on Thomas's anniversary because nobody would acknowledge them, you know. We'd be sitting down having dinner on Thomas's anniversary, and I'd be looking at Ralph, so, you know, are you going to make a little toast? And he wouldn't do it. And I'd have to do it all the time. But I guess that's what just makes us different. We're all different. Not every woman's going to be more outspoken, and not every man's going to keep it to himself. There may be those role reversals, but it has been a real challenge. And, you know, over the years with the foundation, as I said, I've been really proud of what he's achieved, and I really, whilst we've got a small team around us and a really good team now, because we've got all these people from Westpac that have been volunteering, he's done all of this himself. And then I guess in the early days, I was there to support him, so I'd like to take a little bit of credit for that. But I sort of just feel that it was so, I just didn't think he was ever going to walk away from it. And I actually, to this day, don't think that he ever will. But I've only just realised since I started counselling earlier this year, and I've started doing counselling on a weekly basis, and I think the continuity has been really good. And as I said earlier, I hate it. Every week I think, God, what's she going to talk about today? But we managed to fill the time, and I do feel a weight lifted off my shoulders. So I would like to see Ralph in particular go. He started seeing a counsellor before me, and then he stopped. And that's why I think we've come to a bit of a crossroads where I think he just doesn't want to hear my feelings or my emotion, and you need to get up and find something to do with your life. And that's hard at 60. I was a mother at home for 27 years with hardly any work-life balance, and so it's hard to reinvent yourself later on in life. So look, it has been an absolute struggle, but I think the longer you go through it, if you can stick together and work at it, then that really does help you understand each other. I think the reason we're going to Pentos is because, from my understanding, it's very full-on therapy to get the two people grieving together, which we personally, I think many of us just don't do because we're so different. So I don't know, as I said, watch this space. I don't know whether that will be good for us. I'm really hoping it is. I'm hoping and praying that it is, because I feel like we've got so much living left to do, and I don't want to try and find somebody else to share my life with now. And I think from the very first night that we were in the hospital, when Thomas's life support was turned off, somebody, said, oh, you might not survive this, one of our family member, and I thought, well, that's really helpful. Thank you very much for that. But at the same time, I had said to Ralph, you know what? I'm going to be a really sad person, and you're going to hate it. And you might not know what to do with me, but I want you to know that nobody will ever understand you, and nobody will ever understand me as much as we understand each other. So I guess if I try and keep those thoughts, it might get us somewhere. What was the second question again, Chris? Oh, the transplant recipients, yes. The whole transplant process was very daunting, especially, I'm sure it was for Madeline and Stuart and Ralph as well, but it was very daunting for me because when we were in the hospital, I said no originally, only for a brief time until the family, our 17-year-old daughter, talked me around. I just didn't want anybody to touch him after he'd been through what he'd been through. But we did do the transplant. It's a very difficult situation with organ transplants. You can't actually just reach out and get in touch with the person. However, we did meet a lady last year who received Thomas's liver, and Ralph really wanted to meet her. It was really by chance. She'd written a letter to us thanking us, but it goes through to the organ donation people, and then they passed it on to us. And we'd had it for a long time. We'd moved out of our house in the Southern Highlands a number of years ago, and everything was in boxes. And Ralph rang me one day around Thomas's anniversary and said, look, do you know where that letter is? And I said, oh, it's in a box in the garage. How am I going to go and find it? And he said, oh, it's really important. But anyway, eventually he found a photograph of it, and he reached out to this person who had been following the foundation through social media, and she'd posted something the same day as Thomas's anniversary saying that she'd received the gift of life. And they kind of put two and two together, got in touch privately, and we did meet. But as far as wanting to meet those people, Thomas's heart wasn't donated because he had to die after they took the life support off. That's because they couldn't declare him brain dead in the hospital because without various tests. So they had to actually take the life support off, let him pass away, and then he was taken to surgery. So for that reason, you can't donate the heart, but they use the parts of the heart like valves for babies and things like that. I think if I was meeting somebody if I had the opportunity to meet somebody that had Thomas's heart, I would want that. Most definitely. I have met a family who have heard their son's heart beating in another man's chest, and they've since gone on to be the best man at his wedding and been the godparents to his children, which I think is a really beautiful thing. As far as meeting the lady who lost her liver and has Thomas's liver, initially I had all these terrible things going on in my head. Well, what did she do? Was she a heavy drinker? Why did she have a bad, liver? But unbeknownst to me, who was very quick to judge, that she had an ectopic pregnancy and required a blood blood transfusion, and she got hepatitis C, which killed her liver. And look, they were beautiful people and they've reached out a few times. I have to say, it's very hard for me. I don't want to become friends. So I don't know why that is. I guess it just reminds you that, you know, Thomas is living, which is wonderful. It's wonderful that we did that. And I'm very grateful to Madeline for talking her mum around. So, yeah, hope that answers your question. Oh, thank you.
Did Thomas or Stuart have a favourite saying? My son, his favourite saying, he was 21, don't worry mum, it's all good. Everything was all good.
Yeah. Oh, I think there were lots of funny sayings, and I have to say, when Stuart got past being that little boy of 14 and was all of a sudden 17, he'd be walking through the house, he'd be home from boarding school, he'd be walking through the house. Oh my God, we could just see Thomas in him. And they're quite different to look at, the boys. And I would have also said that they were extremely different in personality. But I think Stuart's personality changed greatly after Thomas died. And I think, like all of us when we're with people, he was living behind a facade. He was definitely this funny boy with everybody, but I think he had deep pain, obviously, why, you know, he may not have made that choice if he wasn't feeling that. But they used to always take a lot of things off South Park, all those revolting shows that are pretty rude. And, but they sounded the same. But the one thing that I remember from Stuart most, the funniest thing that he did, he had a little job after he left the university and was at home for a while and started to sort of come out of his room after several months. Somebody from Headspace had told us to try and get him out and get him a little job, and he was working at North Shore Private Hospital in the storeroom, unpacking boxes, taking stuff around the hospital. And he started coming home and calling me Catheter instead of Kathy. So he, you know, it wasn't so much a saying, but like, he was just so funny. He had lots of little things like that. I'm sure Tom did too, but things are all starting to get a bit cloudy now. But that's beautiful. And, you know, it's nice that they say that, even if that's not really how they feel. Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you. Yeah. Oh, really? How beautiful. It's interesting too. I think, I'm sure you all feel like this. You see people in the street and you see them. You see these beautiful children that we've lost, whether they were little or whether they were grown people. You know, it's hard not to imagine what their lives will be like today. Yeah, thank you. All good? Sorry? Oh, thank you so much.
So there we go.
That's so lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's so lovely. So Stuart has, we started off, I don't want to hold everybody up too long, but we started off in the Southern Highlands. We had, where we used to live, there was a river down behind the two houses, the last two houses that we had, and we asked the council if we could put a bench where this little fishing spot was. Not that our kids were really fishing as such, but we just wanted to put a bench down there for Thomas. So we did, and we had a little plaque made. And then when Stuart, and then we asked the King's School, where both the boys went to school as boarders, if we could put a bench on the white oval, which was the big oval where they used to play rugby, and all the first games and things from the other schools would come there. So we had a lovely plaque put on a bench there for Thomas as well. And then when Stuart died, we asked the school if we could take the plaque off, and we had another plaque replacing it, which was about both the boys, about the two brothers being together again. Anyway, unbeknownst to us, some of the mothers who were, and fathers who were friends, parents of boys in Stuart's year, who he was really close to, they asked us would we like to come down and meet at Mona Vale Beach, which was where Stuart took his life. And they had all got together, and we went down there and had a little celebration just to remember him. And they'd all got together and put a bench on the beach for Stuart. So we've got one in the Highlands with Thomas's name, one at Mona Vale with Stuart's, and one at the school with the boys. And sorry, is it Avril? Avril has also lost a child and has a table there next door to where Stuart's bench is. So is it a boy or a girl? Your son, Adam. So Adam and Stuart are there together, which is really lovely. And so Avril bought me some shells from the beach, which I think is really beautiful because we're now living in Berry on the south coast, and I really don't get to go to any, or we get up to the Highlands sometimes, and occasionally I'll sit with Tom, but I wish I could go there. Oh, thank you so much. One of the courses we did, which was the grief, it was the very first one at Quest that my husband and I did last Christmas, just before Christmas at Quest for Life, which was the people who had lost a child to suicide. And I met a lady there who was from the Northern Beaches, and her son had taken his life up there. And after she met me, she went to the bench one day and she took this lovely framed photograph of her son, and she sat down with some, I think it was some Christmas bush and the photo, and she introduced her son to Thomas and sent me a photograph of it. So that was really lovely as well. It's really, things like that are very meaningful, really meaningful. Thank you so much, April.
Thank you. Well, I'm now going to ask Diane.
Kathy, I think this is a real honour
Thank you.
to be asked to thank you. I have been so excited to meet Kathy Kelly. Would you agree? Yeah, I've come today to listen to you.
Thank you so much.
I feel called to listen to you.
Thank you.
Every time I mentioned Kathy Kelly's name to someone, they all knew you. Yet when I met her this morning, I said, I've forgotten your first name.
That's part of grief, I think. I think we all do that.
But you promised us to be honest and open, and you delivered.
Thank you.
You taught us about learning to love ourselves and our journey. And I don't know why I was chosen to speak to you today,
Oh, it's a pleasure. So nice.
but I encourage you to keep on the journey of discovering yourself.
Thank you.
That we heard today about Kathy's grief in amongst your son's grief and the complexity with your relationship with your husband and your beautiful Madeline. I believe we've probably all got our own Madeleines. But I am so grateful for what you've said today. And I just recently, last week, listened to a mass that was said in St Mary's Cathedral. And one of the daughters of the children was one of our Sydney judges. And I really felt compelled to listen to what this judge had to say about her mother. And she read a parable called The Valiant Woman. And I don't know if you've ever heard that.
No, I should do. Look it up, absolutely.
I'll look it up for
Yeah.
you and I'll write it for you.
Oh, that'd be beautiful.
It's the most beautiful, beautiful proverb that I've ever heard. And everything you talked about today is summed up in that passage. And I encourage you.
Be lovely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so glad it was.
And I do believe in signs, like Kathy. Do we all get signs? My daughter was, her name was Carla, and I was shopping for an outfit yesterday, and I found Carla Sampati's just released a Carla t-shirt. So
Perfect.
Thank you
Perfect.
for mentioning about signs.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.